All right, guys, simply put, this is going to be one of the most important videos you watch in preparation for this year's fantasy hockey season. Breakout players are the bread and butter of winning your fantasy hockey league every single year. You need to have at least one, maybe even at least two or three on your team in order for you to be in contention to win your fantasy hockey league. You don't win drafts in your first 3 rounds. You can lose drafts in your first 3 rounds, but you win by getting these elite players that break out and have these monster seasons. This is a crucial video. Let's get into it. I love every single player on this list. That's why I've curated this list, but Adam Fantilli might be one of my favorites. He is a superstar level talent and now has the opportunity to be the clear-cut #1 center in Columbus for the next 15 years. If you need a reminder of how talented Fantilli was, he ended with 30 goals, 35 assists for 65 points in 36 games in his draft year in the NCAA Big Ten. For comparison, Celebrini had finished with 64 points in 38 games. That should show you the level of talent that you're dealing with a guy like Adam Fantilli. Last year in the National Hockey League, Fantilli posted 27 points in 49 games with 12 goals, 115 shots, 63 hits, and 25 blocks. His shots per 60 finished right around the 9, exactly at 9, which would have translated to around 190 shots at an 82 game pace. But the biggest contributor to Fantilli's breakout season this year will be his increase in average time on ice, where last year he finished at a measly 15:43, just under 16 minutes. This year, I think he by far eclipses the 18-minute mark, maybe even somewhere upwards of the 20-minute mark. There is nobody that is going to block Adam Fantilli from reaching that #1 center position. Boone Jenner will most likely play left wing on their top line alongside him due to the unfortunate gap in their lineup with Johnny Gaudreau passing away. Rest in peace. My condolences. But outside of that, who is blocking? Sean Monahan? That's the guy that's going to stop him? Okay, maybe Monahan gets top line matchup, but that does nothing but benefit Fantilli to seeing easier matchups all throughout the game. He's just too talented as a player, and this is the season you're going to get a ton of value for him, especially at his ADP. Next year, everybody is going to be on this guy after he's broken out. Everyone's going to have him on your radar. This is the year where you get a ton of value for drafting him. I want everything to do with this guy. I'm projecting him at a 60.30 goal season with a ton of shots, could even be anywhere in that 215 shot mark as we project, maybe even over. His hits are going to jump as well. I love everything about Fantilli going into next year. McTavish is going to establish himself as a real fantasy hockey gem this season across categories and in points leagues. There is some competition for the #1 spot with Leo Carlsson, as I do think they play him full time this year and they don't kind of manage his game load. But the advantage that McTavish has over a guy like Leo Carlsson is he's a little bit more rounded in the peripherals categories, as well as he's consistently had dual eligibility in both the seasons in which he's played with the Ducks. McTavish has been shuffled around the lineup over the past 2 years, oftentimes seeing opportunity in the top 6 at left wing. I think it's more likely they keep him at center this year, as he was over 50% on faceoffs over the course of last year and was around that 400 win mark. So I do think they end up playing this guy at center. But last year, McTavish finished with 19 goals, 23 assists for 42 points with 130 shots, 67 hits, and was 1 point shy of the year prior where he had his career high total. But he did it in only 64 games. McTavish is also averaging 16-17 time on ice last year, as we saw him kind of shuffled around the lineup a lot of the time. Sometimes he was the third line center. Sometimes, like I said before, he was in the top 6. But I think similar to Carlson's situation, I think McTavish will see consistent top 6 minutes next year and power play one time. And if that's the case, I could easily see this guy being a 60-plus point player with around 100 hits. He's going to become a categories machine. He's already a bangers gem if you guys count PIMs. I think there's so much opportunity with McTavish. I think there's more talent that's going to come into fruition in the Ducks. They're still not going to be a good team, but the forwards surrounding him with the emergence of guys like Frank Vetrano and then Cutter Gauthier coming into the fold. I like everything about Mason McTavish. I think he's going to be a guaranteed top 6 player, whether it's on the wing or at center. I'm not worried at all about Trevor Zegras. This is a guy who could honestly be traded depending on, what happens with that situation. So they just love McTavish. They are going to play him in a top 6 role. I think he's going to break out based off what we saw last season from him, where he had 42 points in 64 games. So I could easily see a 60-point season out of him. It is incredibly hard to identify a breakout defenseman because it's usually dependent on having a power play 1 role. Sanderson is my go-to candidate for a breakout this season simply because of that reason. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but the majority of the time last season, Sanderson was the power play guy in Ottawa on that first unit. That's including Chychrun and Chabot in that mix. And with Chychrun now out the door and Chabot a consistent injury risk, I'm putting my money on Jake to be the guy in that power play 1 slot. If you've watched other videos on this channel, you would know by now that the Sens went from having the 8th best power play in the year 2022-23 to having a bottom 10 power play last season at only 18%. You would also know by watching the channel that Mike and I have him as a must-draft defenseman, putting up 38 points with 158 shots and 139 blocks last season. Sanderson is more than just a power play 1 defenseman, which again is part of the reason why we love him so much. He is so well-rounded with his peripherals. Outside of hits, he's a little bit lackluster in that area, but he plays every situation, and last year we saw him playing well over 23 minutes average time on ice, even with the likes of Chychrun and Chabot in the lineup. The other thing you have to remember about defensemen and their breakouts is that Sanderson is still very young and will only be 22 next season. The likes of Victor Hedman, Miro Heiskanen, and even Adam Fox didn't have over a 50-point season until they were at least 23 years old. Sanderson still has a lot of growth ahead of him in anticipation of what's to come in Ottawa. I'm expecting a 50-point breakout season for one of the league's best up-and-coming 2-way defensemen. He just needs to stay on that power play 1. Crazy what happens when you give a prospect more than just 1 year to develop. Nobody is calling Juraj Slafkovsky a bust now after a 20-goal, 50-point season with 152 shots, 153 hits, and 72 blocks, while still playing well under 18 minutes average time on ice. But the story doesn't end there with Slav, as he had a white-hot 19 points in his last 20 games with 48 shots, 43 hits, and 17 blocks. I'm not remotely worried about Laine stealing minutes or taking over that line 1 role, as taking him off that line with Caulfield and Suzuki would just be silly after the breakout that we saw out of him in the second half last year. And if he continues to play on that top line, we could be staring at a 30-plus goal, 70-point, 190-plus shot, 150-plus hit, and 80-plus block bangers league monster in the making. I'm all over this guy in drafts, but I'm also staying cautious. I'm not reaching on him by any means. I love him at his ADP. You could argue taking him slightly early, but there are going to be some team inconsistencies and some growing pains with Slafkovsky, as he still is only 19 years old. But given everything we've seen from that second half breakout, and if he stays on that top line in Montreal, he will be all over that power play 1 as well. Juraj Slafkovsky could absolutely be a league winner. I want everything to do with this guy, much like other players on this list, but Slafkovsky could really make a mark next year, given his elite bangers categories with his hits and his blocks, and his shot total should come up as well. If everything goes to plan, I'm expecting a massive league-winning season out of Slafkovsky. Byfield really had a solid year last year with 55 points, 20 goals, 161 shots, 66 hits, and 19 blocks, which you could technically classify as a breakout. But I think there is much more with Quinton Byfield. We know he is eventually going to take over and be the #1 center in LA. But with how incredibly consistent Anze Kopitar has been, how early could we realistically see Byfield in that top line role? I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but what I do know is Byfield only averaged 16.29 average time on ice last year. In 40 of the 80 games that he played, Byfield averaged over his time on ice of 16.29. And out of those 40 games in which he did average over his time on ice, Byfield had 30 points in those 40 games. Even if Byfield doesn't take over that top line center, he should still consistently see over 18 minutes average time on ice next year with no more Pierre-Luc Dubois in the mix. And if that's the case, we could easily see him make the jump to 65 plus points and 30 goals, as he likely plays second line center with Kevin Fiala and Trevor Moore. Or there's the nuclear option where Byfield ends up on that top line right wing, which we saw a lot of last season and was a big contribution to his breakout year. And he's going to get top line minutes in that situation the whole year alongside Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. I really think there's more to Byfield's game, especially in the peripherals department. You're going to see this guy eventually just throw his body around, very similar to a Uri Slafkovsky. I think his hit totals are going to come up. His shot totals are already extremely good on his 82 game average. I really like Byfield next year. I think there's a great chance we see him just jump to the top line and become a 65 plus point guy with 30 goals. You're going to hear a lot about Dylan Guenther out of everybody in the FP team. He has shown an incredibly good pace in which he's played at the National Hockey League level, including a 35.18 goal, 121 shot season out of Guenther last year and only 45 games played. He definitely lacks in those peripheral categories in the hits and blocks, but he's shown consistently that he could be a 50 plus point player. I think we see it next year. I think he's a solidified 50 point guy and will be playing at top 6 minutes all year long, along with Power Play 1. Him and Logan Cooley, another player that I really was justifying putting on this list, played a ton last year. They developed a chemistry that saw both of them really have a successful season, especially towards the end of the year. But the thing we love most out of Dylan Guenther, again, is his shots per 60. He finished at 9.9 last year over that 45 games. He could easily be a 30-goal player this season. He's really the Wyatt Johnson of this year, a guy that you can pick up towards the end of your draft that has 30-goal upside and could hit well over 200 shots. I find is going to be incredibly good value. I'm expecting the breakout season this year. He's at least going to be in that 50-55 point range with a ton of shots and a hopefully 30-goal season. That will do for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content. It really helps us grow this channel. We love bringing you guys these players. I might even do a second breakout players video. So if you want to see that, definitely leave a comment down below, as well as players that you think could absolutely break out this season. I love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions in the comments, so be sure to leave a comment as well. That will do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Have yourselves a fantastic rest of the day.